Morning. I think we're going to be starting. Welcome to this second plenary. It's my privilege to present Professor Massimo Fusillo. He teaches literary criticism and comparative literature at Scuola Normale di Pisa, and he has taught at the University of Pisa, ICLA. He has been visiting professor at the University of Paris, Northwestern University, University of Chicago. He was Fulbright chair in the University of Chicago. He's also the president of the Association for Comparative Literature and Historical Theory and coordinator of the Research Committee on Literatures, Arts and Media for the International Comparative Literature Association, the ICLA. He's a member of the Research Committee on Comparative Histories of Literatures in European languages, and he's curating a project, the Baroque. His research interests include the modern perception of myth, theory and history of the novel, the thematic criticism, and more recently, intermediate studies, intermediality, in which we have collaborators together in a number of ways. Among his most recent books, Negative Empathy with Stefano Ercolino, Heroes of Love, Greece According to Pasolini, Fetishes, Literature, Cinema, and Visual Arts. And he's also a member of the jury of the Pasolini Prize for Thesis and a supporting member of the Sigismondo Malatesta Association and member of the Inter-University Research Center for Queer Studies. He's director of the Journal of Alternative Sexualities in Ancient and Modern Literatures and in the Arts, and a board member in a number of journals, including Literary Research Contemporanea, Simulon, Athens and Rome, Pasolini Studies, Manticciopora, Adventure, Romanica, Olamusentia, Schiami, Vinge Boacin, and the editorial board of Dionysus, and also the Journal of the Association of Comparative Literature and Historical Theory, the Twin, which actually just issued a call for papers yesterday. I think I will see. So today he's going to give us an introduction to Melodrama as excess of passions, negative empathy, catharsis, and the sublime, with intermediate aspects of Shakespeare, Macbeth, and Verdi's opera. So it's going to be very interesting.
Thank you very much, Asun, for this. Such a nice introduction. I'm very happy to be here. And actually, it's a very sensation from that I live very close to an international congress, just walking. And yes, as you can see from my first slide, this is the so-called paratext. I will work on a net of concepts. Melodrama will be the key concept, but then we also will think about passions, especially empathy and negative empathy. And the image you see in the first slide is Fuseli, very interesting Swiss painter, and this is Lady Macbeth. And now, of course, you recognize Maria Callas, and we begin with Melodrama. Peter Brook's seminal essay, The Melodramatic Imagination, first published in 1972, and there are 3 other editions after that, identified in the 19th century novel, especially Balzac and James, so 2 different phases of 19th century novel, an enduring image that originated in the theater and that spread to the cinema, imagery. For Brooks, melodrama is thus no longer or not only a genre, another key concept, but above all, a mode. Mode is not as famous, as crucial as genre, but that's important for us. What is a mode? A set of formal and thematic constants that, while clearly historicized, transcend different periods and genres. This notion of mode has been theorized many years ago in the 90s by Gerard Renet, who places it alongside the broader and more abstract concept, this is really a concept, of time, and the more historical and concrete concept of genre, resulting in a typically structuralist trio. From another, less formalist perspective, a little bit later than Genet, in Italy, Remo Cesarani and this school have long been working on the main modes of the Western imagination: realistic, fantastic, pathetic. There are also traveling concepts. And pathetic is very close to our guiding concept, melodrama. It seems to me, however, that melodrama is a particularly significant case of a mode that is quickly transformed into an aesthetic. Its characteristic themes and very specific expressive techniques are emphasized as strategies aimed at arousing specific emotional reaction, especially astonishment and deep feelings. It is therefore an aesthetic that favors excess, exaggerated passions, extreme emotionality. The nucleus that nourishes the spectacular, twists and turns, the classical recognitions, and it animates stories that revolve around primary oppositions, almost Manichaean polarities, such as that between the private and the public. The private and the public is typical of melodrama in the sense of opera. We will deal with melodrama as an aesthetic, a transmedial aesthetic, but especially in Italy, melodrama means musical theater, and musical theater is always around primary opposition, especially private and public, or between figures of love and power. And power means real and symbolic fathers, but sometimes also wicked mothers. Some about history. Here, the image comes from a TV series, Pose. Although its antecedents can be traced back to the theater of antiquity, in particular to the last experimental tragedies of Euripides, especially Iphigenia and Tauris, Helen, and to other periods such as the Baroque, which is the center of an intermediate project I'm directing for the International Society of Comparative Literature. The melodrama is firmly rooted in modern age. So although its antecedent can be very ancient, it's rooted in modern age. Its origins are linked to the great historical rupture of the French Revolution and this desacralization of power. In this climate of cognitive democracy, as Fabio Vittorini wrote, a popular and anti-realistic genre developed, the Melodrama, which anticipated and then fully expressed the romantic sensibility, experimenting with hybrid stylistic register that went beyond the classical dichotomy between tragedy and comedy. In the opera, for example, some Verdi's operas such as Rigoletto or Forza del Destino are in hybridization, are basically tragic, but with some hybrid with comedy. From this genre, the melodrama, the French melodrama, which was very successful on the Parisian stage in its historical and social context, the melodramatic mode soon spread to other genres. The realistic novel, despite the fact that the realism was a fundamentally antithetical approach. The Gothic novel, on the other hand, which had a natural tendency towards rebellious and sensationalist effect. The musical theatre, which often used melodrama, the Melodrama, as a direct source for its libretti, as well as retracing its thematic and formal constellations. And finally, the cinema, where the Melo, again a French word, was at first recognizable as a genre, especially in its two golden ages, the 30s and the 50s, and then became an ubiquitous and elusive mode. And finally, to come to the present day, television series, where it appears a well-established, if barely recognizable, strand. And they make two very opposite examples. This is Us, which is a classical, traditional TV series, long and melodramatic, and Pose, which is devoted to the transgender community and especially to the ballrooms. This was to define melodrama, but I also dealt with reception of melodrama through aesthetic reaction. And empathy and negative empathy is a significant case of this reaction. Focusing on a concept, melodrama, also means crossing parallel and similar themes to create fields of intersection and hybridization. We will now focus on the aspect of reception the melodrama activates and the aesthetic effects to which it aspires. Melodrama shows an extraordinary fascination with negative characters and the point of view of evil, arousing an empathy that ultimately leads to catharsis and the sublime. So negative empathy as a strategy and catharsis and sublime as aesthetic effects. We are thus dealing with a fundamental mechanism for understanding the importance of aesthetic experience and its social and political function. The ability to make us enter with our minds into words and subjects far removed from our own, sometimes in dissonance with our ethical, political, and cultural conviction, and our social identity. Understood in this way, negative empathy certainly has a cathartic function, as Sigmund Freud suggested in Psychopathic Characters on the Stage, a short essay that focuses on the desire for multiple lives as a primary phenomenon that only literature and theater can fully satisfy. That's what's my opinion. Thanks to the aesthetic framework that allows paradoxical identification. Already in Aristotle's Poetics, which follows gorgeous theories in this regard, gorgeous theories of tragedy, the precipitous effects of tragedy, pity and fear, contain within themselves all the cathartic potential of negative empathy. Identifying with villains serves to discharge self-destructive and destructive impulses, the dark side of one's psyche, anti-social drives, and to playfully transfigure them in artistic performance. Distance is the fundamental prerequisite for empathy in general. I'm always referring to empathy's more complex, non-immediate type, which arises from mind reading and reenactment. Reenactment is a very important concept of intermediate studies, of performance studies. And I think that in our life, we always reenact social roles, political roles, sexual identities. And empathy is also a matter of reenactment, in my opinion. Distance is also the prerequisite for two closely related aesthetic phenomena, the sublime and catharsis, the catharsis. Sublime is an aesthetic concept, quite controversial, I think, well known to everybody. Catharsis is more controversial. We can say that catharsis is a kind of liberation of energy, of negative energy. To record the metaphor to which Hans Blumenberg's metaphor and concept, we can say, devoted the famous essay, we can only be spectators of a shipwreck because we are far from it, distance. We can only enjoy the sublime experience of a terrible storm, an abyss, if our lives are not in danger. Similarly, we can identify with negative characters and experience even extreme evil only because the aesthetic frame protects us and makes us suspend our moral and ideological system, ultimately leading us to the catharsis of negative energy. Here maybe you recognize this pick from Breaking Bad, which is one of the most impressive examples of negative empathy, a kind of modern Macbeth. Yeah, I forgot to change slide. This is the slide about distance, and in this case I chose as image Turner dance. In the long history of the tragic charm, made up of constant oscillation and transformation, it is Shakespeare who deserves the credit for having developed negative empathy to the maximum. His tragedies are in fact a high point in the history of this technique of negative empathy. Whatever the degree of latent identification they more or less evoke, these negative characters are among the most extraordinary in the world's imagination today, embodied in an almost antonomastic way the idea of evil. An evil that knows how to be subtly and inexplicably fascinating. Iago, Richard III, Lady Macbeth. And you see a pic from the famous movie Richard III, set in our age. For the category of negative empathy, Iago undoubtedly represents a borderline case. Is it possible to empathize, even only in a latent form and detached from moral judgment, with a character whose evil has no real motives? Are we not perhaps faced with a case of absolute evil, which as such can fascinate it precisely because of its absoluteness, without ever creating identification? That's my opinion. I think we can admire his rhetorical strategies. I believe that if there is a margin of possible empathy with his character, it lies in his skill as the muse, in his refined rhetorical strategies of manipulation, which makes Othello a tragedy of language. Macbeth, on the other hand, is a striking example of a tragedy centered on negative characters. The positive one played a rather marginal role, who, as Agostino Lombardo argues, are never one-sided, but are always complex and multifaceted. It is a radical operation that perhaps finds its best counterpart in Dostoevsky's Demons, a choral novel with almost exclusively negative characters, and arouses a latent empathy for an entire community. The demons are the terrorists, as you know. A community permeated by evil and madness, as it will later occur in a very nice movie, Michael Haneke's The White Rose. In Shakespeare's Macbeth, the technique of negative empathy intersects with a number of related themes: the dream, the supernatural, hallucination, the nocturnal unconscious. As Jan Gogh summarizes, this set of themes is grouped under the basic idea of history as nightmare. Latent identification mediated by aesthetic distance is triggered above all by the protagonist, the pressure of the witches and the prediction of the future. His fragility, his inner conflict, his dependence on his wife, Lady Macbeth, are all factors that activate a disturbing negative empathy, especially in the first phase, before the transformation into bloodthirsty tyrant. This is not the case with Lady Macbeth, who is configured more as an androgynous demon, farther removed from the fully human characterization of her husband. Lady Macbeth acquires empathic depth only in the final moment of delirium and somnambulism, although it's always happened in the theatre. There have been great actresses such as Adelaide Ristori in Italy and Sarah Bernhardt, who have instead given their interpretation an empathic and very human key. We already talked about intermediality because theater is different media than literature, but now I always keep it another time, but this is, you see another beautiful image from a movie with one of the many movies inspired by Macbeth. Say, intermediality now with Verdi. Music is undoubtedly a catalyst for empathy, mainly because of its extraordinary emotional impact. It acts as an encoding of emotions in their purest state. This function is particularly evident in a mixed genre, such as musical theatre, where singing develops and enhances the dramaturgical situation outlined in the libretto. Musical theatre, in particular Italian opera, has a character system in which negative characters play a constant structural role. George Bernard Shaw said once, defined opera as the genre in which the tenor wants to sleep with the soprano, while the baritone does everything he can to prevent it. It's an effective line, but it covers only part of melodrama. In the dialectic of the voice, the baritone plays an important role, so that throughout the history of melodrama, the semantic depth of the rivals always goes far beyond their narratological function as operas. This is the case of Macbeth. The two protagonists are not antagonists, but evil characters. The reception of Shakespeare in musical theatre has been and continues to be just as rich, almost as rich as that in film. In the first phase, which was still essentially neoclassic, the revival was mediated by French translations, reworkings, which tended to normalize the Shakespearean text. This is well demonstrated in a detailed essay, again by Fabio Vittorini. From this point of view, Verdi's Macbeth marks an epochal turning point. It is, in fact, the first opera based exclusively and entirely on Shakespeare's text, obviously in Italian translation. And at the same time, it is, I quote, the keystone of Verdi's beautiful production, end quote, by Massimo Fusillo. Understood and appreciated by critics in its disruptive change only relatively late, it is the encounter with one of Shakespeare's more disturbing tragedies. And Shakespeare was an author with whom Verdi would have a deep and intense relation throughout his artistic career. And through Shakespeare, Verdi forged his expressive and expressionist power, his ability as a great dramatist as well as a great musician. Macbeth is an anomalous opera, firstly because it's not a love opera, which is absolutely unusual in a romantic melodrama, and secondly because, as a consequence, it is not based on the thematic triangle mentioned above. It was precisely the absence of a conventional structure combined with direct work on a text as rich in expressive nuance as Shakespeare that allowed Verdi to develop in an unprecedented way the interviewing of acting and singing that would be central to acting and singing that would be central to his last two masterpieces, also based on Shakespeare, Othello and Falstaff. Thanks to this interweaving, the smoothness of bel canto is deconstructed in favor of a continuous and regular alternation of vocal registers, from sottovoce, low voice, to explained singing, dictated only by the dramatist situation. And this is precisely this tense and interweaving of words and music that allows us to enter the mind of the character, to feel empathy. As always, Verdi worked intensively in direct contact with his librettists, in this case Francesco Maria Piave, and then at times Andrea Maffei, from whom he asked and sometimes imposed certain expressive solutions. Even if Verdi, unlike Wagner, never wrote his own libretto, the self-confidence he showed on several occasions in his rich correspondence could lead us to define him with a deliberate, slight paradox as the best Italian dramatist of the 19th century. So he never wrote a drama, a verse. He was a musician. He had such a dramaturgical attitude. It's really impressive. His entire poetics revolves around the interaction between the verbal and the musical text, and especially the performative potential, which he synthesized with the highly effective formula of the scenic word, la parola scenica, and which theater semiologists theorized about at the end a century later. Verdi anticipated theatrical semiology. In Macbeth, all this takes place through a progressive elaboration of the dramatic text, which is generally followed with a great fidelity. But Verdi was often criticized because he wasn't adherent to the Shakespeare text, but it's not true. Of course, there are lots of cuts, but it's more or less Shakespeare text. It's a poetics of concentration, Aristotelic concentration. He asked poche parole, ma significate. Few words, but meaning. Verdi repeatedly asked Piave, and it was studied by Paolo Gallarati, a good Italian music historian of theater and music. The negative empathy towards the protagonist arises especially in the first two acts, from the first appearance of the witches and their discovery of prophecy. Witches are a long-lasting anthropological theme of Greek symbolic poignancy. If in Shakespeare they recall a demonic and supernatural perversion of motherhood and order, and if through our eyes today they may appear a sort of underground resistance to the world of patriarchy, in the 19th century they had become an object of study if we think of Jules Michelet's 1962 essay connecting them to ancient fertility rock, Verdi seems to echo August Schlegel's aesthetic reading, for whom witches embody the inexplicable, the uncontrollable, the uncanny. Musically, to this connotation is added a grotesque component, the romantic aesthetic of the ugly that Verdi knew how to use very well. With this disturbing and anomalous picture for Italian opera, generally not very fond of the fantastic, Verdi's Macbeth opens. It is the image of that negative energy that will completely dominate the protagonist. Empathy towards him is immediately triggered by the first aria he sings, an emotional reaction to her prophecy, in which he expresses dismay at a marvelous desire that is just forming in his mind. He repeats several times, pensier di sangue, donde sei nato, thoughts of blood, from whence you were born. Inner conflict will characterize several other moments of this first phase, the crucial decision to kill King Duncan and the duet with Lady Macbeth after the completion of the murder. And then, after the completion of the second crime, the concertato, in which the protagonist hallucinates the ghost of his friend Banco. I think now we can see a clip from. I will talk about this direction later, but since we are talking about negative empathy and inner conflict, I think this is a very good example.
Io ti grandissa, mi sfuggi nel portiere. nulla esiste ancora. Il suo cruento mio pensiero della forma, e come pena mi presenta lo suo. Preciso, all'altro in povertà, non dir lontano, al squillo e parlo.
Yeah, as you said, the freedom of a director now is total, and I think it's good. It's a very creative direction, the hallucination. It was just a moment before the murder, but we saw 3 times the murder just as hallucination. There was a kind of double of Macbeth. So the oscillation which allows Ant to enter to Macbeth's throne side is alive above all in arias that take the form of monologues. It was actually more a monologue, a theatrical monologue than an aria. So only at the end there was some music, some singing. A technique, monologue is a technique of subjectivization that is the main vehicle of empathy in theater. So I put the subtitle so you saw that the text was a monologue and was taken from Shakespeare, directly from Shakespeare. To portray the facet of this inner conflict, the music coheres around certain phrases and stage words, such as the obsession with impurity after the murder, impurity of his hand. In the second part of Macbeth, Verdi's Macbeth, the second 2 acts, the protagonist has, to all intents and purposes, started in retirement. The dramaturgical curve focuses more and more on the chain of crimes committed to preserve power and on the inevitable decline. There is no lack of topical area that gives expression to the regret for the general execration in which he has fallen and the poor weakness of his life. But no more moment of inner conflicts that activate a negative empathy. what about the end of Verdi Macbeth and empathy? Empathy is negative empathy is more pronounced in the first version, staged at La Pergola in Florence in 1947, which includes an aria after the second appearance of the witches and about the death of the protagonist on stage, thus preserving the focus on him. While the second version of 1965, the one generally performed in the theater today, ends with a chorus that celebrates at a sustained pace the liberation from the oppressor. In the case of Macbeth, Verdi seems to indulge in Shakespeare's experiment of systematically entering into the facilitating mind of a negative character and to enhance it with music. The case of the other protagonist, Lady Macbeth, who is often almost as the double, the mirror image of her husband. How much time do I have now? 10 minutes, okay. Lady Macbeth, who is often seen as almost a double, a mirror image of her husband. In his analysis of the poetics of the parola scenica, scenic work in relation to Shakespeare, Guido Paduano has shown how Verdi, throughout a series of small deviations from his dramatic source, tends to configure Lady Macbeth even more as a demonic power, also capable of sarcasm interacting with her husband. And of course, we can read this opposition in terms of gender patterns. It is really subversive to portray Lady Macbeth as a case of female dominance and to portray Macbeth as a fragile, passive person. It's a subversion of the gender connotation of feminine as passive and masculine as active. The most striking example is the duet in the first act, in which Macbeth is in the grip of absolute terror. Terror is really a theme of Shakespeare and Verdi. While Lady Macbeth minimizes the pathos and directs the practical aspects with pragmatic coldness. And it is the music that directs the meaning. Lady Macbeth's part takes up the melody of Macbeth's part, but in major key, with a sinuous figure entrusted to the cello and the clarinet, accompanied by the pizzicato of the strings. The voice of terror emanating from ego and remorse, with which we, the audience, identify, is countered by the voice of domination of the female demon in a relationship of splitting and mirroring. The aria composed for the 1865 edition of Luce Langue is also part of this expressive strategy of amplification of Lady Macbeth's dominance. It is all about the libido for power. Voluttà del sogno. Voluttà is in archaic Italian libido. In Shakespeare as in Verdi, the protagonist's role culminates in the famous sleepwalking scene, female protagonist, which reverses all the traits of the first part in a dense series of internal reference, presenting a Lady Macbeth distraught with anguish. Given the amplification of her negativity in Verdi's opera, the reversal is even sharper, reinforced by the well-count condition of madness, la scena della pazzia, the madness scene, thus giving this character the traits of an absolute otherness, and perturbing, uncanny spectrality. Yeah, this was, if you wanted to have a look of the text of the scene we saw that the Italian text is much more essential and dense, and the Shakespearean monologue is more articulated, full of nuances. And I want just to show this slide because of the pick of Sarah Bernhardt as Lady Macbeth. In this case, you see also the powerful vision of madness and terror in the sleepwalking scene by Sarah Bernhardt. And I will end my paper with something about performance. I've been talking so far about intermediality, transmediality, and especially about melodrama as a network or as a net of parallel concepts and themes: terror, gender reversal, empathy, especially negative empathy, evil. But I've been talking about Verdi intertextual relation with Shakespeare and music as catalyst of libretto as literary element, musical as intermediate element. But performance is another level of intermediality and intertextuality. And I will say just a few words about that. Two examples. Mario Martone, 2015, a production for the Châtelet in Paris, was totally immersed in a nocturnal setting, very abstract. But there was something totally different in the sleepwalking madness scene. In this case, Martone put, which is also a quite famous cinema director, he put a video by the famous choreographer Raffaella Giordano, which evoked archaic, almost Demartinian. Demartinian is a famous, as you know, Italian anthropologist who wrote a book on many books, especially one about Sud and Magia. And in this case, we had another intermediate element, dance, in a video. And now the version we saw in the Tiger Sea, Emma Dante. Emma Dante is a very interesting director. She's a movie director, but basically opera and theater director. She comes from Palermo, and she works a lot also on ethnographic element and on the mixture between tragic and comic. This production is 2017, co-produced by Turin, Palermo, Macerata, and Edinburgh Festival. And we find Lady Macbeth surrounded by a series of hospital beds, a clear allusion to madness, which begin a dance around her, a moment of surreal grace, enveloped in a very poetic blue, almost as if to prelude to the tragic madness of every song. In Macbeth, the author seems to push the mechanism of negative empathy to the extreme. He makes the spectator enter the character's mind and makes him experience all the doubts, conflicts, and motivation that drive to the negative act, to the feelings. After the initial phase of preparation has ended and the character is starting to the incarnation of evil, identification no longer seems sustainable. This is why Shakespeare, in the finale, celebrates the establishment of a new order and a positive kinship. But it is no coincidence that contemporary reception has compressed this part and amplified the nihilistic component of tragedy. as in the films by Orson Welles, Akira Kurosawa, Roman Polanski, and Kurz. In the same way, Verdi's final chorus, which with its ringing rhythm celebrates the final triumph of the new king and of good over evil, is muffled by Emma Dantes, Rage mentioned earlier. By choice of conductors, Gabriele Ferro and Giampiero Noseda, we find both endings edited together, a solution that has its charm, anti-theological solution, especially because the direction somehow makes them homogeneous. After actors dressed in black have led their swords on the corpse, they all leave the stage and sing the final chord from the proscenium's boxer of the stage. While on the king's body, the classical rosette that throughout the performance is recited chronically, rains down from above. I think that this finale perfectly expresses the nihilistic vision, condensed in its most famous passage of the Shakespeare text. You remember, of course, you remember also William Faulkner's novel. Life is a tale told by nature, full of sound and fury, signifying nothing. Thank you.